We're going to move into kind of, some people call it question and answer. I'd like to think of it more as just more the broadening the conversation. So if anybody wants to, please, yes.
My impression is going to the supermarket counter, the celebrity culture is a culture marked by divorce, breakup of marriage. That's why half the stories are about the marriage being screwed up, and how one gets at that.
And so we know that about 70% of Americans now will cohabit prior to marriage, and it is a risk factor for divorce and for lower levels of marital quality. But we also see that cohabitation is actually more common among this middle American group and the least educated group. And so, I think that could be one reason why we see, an increase in divorce to some extent in the middle American group. But on the cohabitation front, that's an important question. I think it's important, too, for us to realize that the biggest factor now driving the increase in non-marital childbearing is the fact that more and more couples in American life are having their kids in cohabiting relationships. So more than half of all the babies being born outside of marriage now are being born to cohabiting couples. And that number is just going to continue to increase, judging by current trends. Those of us who are concerned about marriage and about kids have to realize that in some ways the biggest challenge facing us when it comes to family life is cohabitation, and the fact that more Americans think that's an okay place to have kids and to raise kids. And we're likely to see more of that in the future. And it's problematic, of course, because cohabiting relationships are much less stable than our married relationships, and they're also much more likely to be plagued by things like violence and infidelity, which of course aren't very good for kids either. So it's a big issue to think about as we move forward. On the Hollywood front, I think you're right. I think people are getting the sense that marriage is fragile in the popular culture and among stars, and that relationships are kind of transitory, and that they can focus more on the sort of things that are not deep, and things that are more transparent, just like beauty and whatnot. So that's worth noting. But I think it's also important just to realize that the work that's been done internationally on the impact of popular culture, like for instance in Brazil, suggests that one of the key drivers in changes in demography and marriage and parenthood and whatnot tends to be the introduction of the television. If you look at the patterns in Brazil, for instance, what you see is that they shift pretty quickly from a more traditional approach to marriage and family life after TV is introduced to different precincts in Brazil. It's probably the clearest empirical evidence that we have to date that the popular culture can have an enormous impact on our families, much more influence than what happens, as I said, in Washington or other public policy circles. So.
I think I remember in that instance too that fertility declined in Brazil.
Yeah,
and I remember Philip Longman at Center for American Progress, I think, commented that either you could, whether it's what's being shown on the television or the fact that there is a television in the home in the evenings now, leave it up to yourselves which one you think might play into that trend.